Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cannabis Accounting Podcast. I have with me today Nicholas Eaton, CPA and founder of Eaton Advisory, a profit and growth focused advisory firm for the cannabis industry. Nick, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Hey, I'm Nick Eaton, CPA. I've been in this industry since 2018. Last year, I started, my own business, Eaton Advisory, really focused on just that, helping cannabis businesses grow and become more profitable. Really kind of pulls from my experience in the industry as a controller, director of finance. Also helps, supported by my background in public accounting. So at the end of the day, I just want to help cannabis businesses and business owners succeed and, have peace of mind. And that business is very much, my calling and the accumulation of my experience.
Nice, nice. For the other CPAs listening and accountants, the cannabis industry, it is a new industry. The vast majority of CPAs are not serving this industry. And so I guess like what first drew you into being interested in serving this as an industry? Because like you could serve other industries in Michigan. And then what drew you to the cannabis industry? And then how did your background in public as a CPA prepare you for what you're doing in the cannabis industry?
For sure. And let me first say that, hey, I was not an accountant that found cannabis. I was a cannabis user and advocate that eventually found accounting. It was back in high
Same.
school, to be honest. What drew me to cannabis back then as a high schooler? It's taboo. It's not sober. It's those were the things as a child, that drew me to it. Now, as I grew older, I certainly, hey, more of an appreciation for what it does for me overall, for my mental well-being and having balance and how I deal with stress, falling asleep at night, helping with chronic pain. So really, hey, I became really a consumer and advocate first for cannabis. It just happened that, as I was working for a CPA firm, that one of the biggest clients for that firm had wanted to get into cannabis. And, it was pretty straightforward for the firm to say, hey, we're going to help whoever we can, even though they weren't exactly pushing to get into cannabis. And I found myself as the, young accountant at the time that was, I guess, in the best position to kind of take that over. And that's what really kicked off my career in cannabis, on the accounting side. And ultimately, I feel that, hey, that background as a CPA, both internal and external of organizations, and really even before that, before accounting, I studied engineering and healthcare, very two other industries where I'm focused on understanding how things function and operate. Um, I think for me, cannabis was it's always been a personal preference. Really understanding how things work has always been a desire of mine. With it being not just a new industry, but one that very much speaks to myself as a person and as a consumer. It's a bit of a stars aligning, as far as why cannabis and why accounting and that kind of a focus in cannabis. It's hard to see my journey taking me anywhere else.
No, that makes sense. And especially being in Michigan, it's like they've had a caregiver program since like 2009 and one of the oldest rec programs. Obviously, right now they're pretty much challenging California for the most, top line sales and everything. And so it definitely has deep roots, cannabis in Michigan. And then, yeah, being a CPA, because I'm over here in Wisconsin and it's like there's definitely CPAs that are into cannabis in Wisconsin, but it is very hush hush. Like, just because we don't even have a medical program yet. So it's still very kind of on the DL. And on that point, kind of just thinking back to your time when you worked for the CPA firm, because more and more CPA firms are entering the space, on a very, regular basis. We're seeing solo CPA firms, a CPA firm of, two to three, five shareholders or partners that are like dipping into cannabis. So when your CPA firm first started thinking about serving a cannabis company, granted it was one of their original clients, like how did some of those early conversations go? Because we're still having them in 2025, believe it or not, where it's, I've spoken to many CPAs and it's very basic questions still about, it's federally illegal. How comfortable are you serving it? What is the tax situation and how should we make sure we're following the correct, tax strategy? So thinking back to from that perspective of like when you work for a CPA firm, how were some of those initial conversations as they started to serve this new industry?
I think you hit the head on the, nail on the head, right? As far as the concerns that a CPA firm would have, this is a firm that back then had been around for 85 years, so well established, very
Yeah.
much a non, Schedule One substances and whatnot. So the firm saw a ton of risk as far as what this could mean for them. And a lot of that, keep in mind, that was back in 2019. So I believe a few years ago, the MICPA came out and ultimately, said, hey, that, CPAs that support the industry, we're operating compliance. That it's not exactly a CPA license concern for serving that industry. Before then, though, there was some perceived risk. I think there were plenty that were still serving it with that mentality of saying, "Hey, we're operating, within our state compliance. That as a CPA, you are licensed at a state level, not at a federal level." But I get kind of both ends of the spectrum, right? That hey, it's still federally illegal. That in some ways you are, getting payments from cannabis companies, from people that operate in a realm that is federally illegal, and you're putting it into your business. That is in some way of money laundering of money that would then come
Yeah,
from
for
your business
sure.
is now clean. It's not cannabis tied. But if you're seeing it from that perspective, I get the concern. I just think that, hey, the past several years has done quite a bit to alleviate those concerns as far as what state CPA societies have expressed, or really just seeing, the bigger just magnitude of operators in the space. It's really tough to imagine, federally undoing kind of where we're at and the momentum that's built, or really trying to go after CPAs or go after businesses for operating in a realm that is state compliant. Um, but I do think the state of Michigan and the MICPA kind of giving that confidence goes a long way, at least for people like myself, other CPAs who are probably
For
a little
sure.
guilty of overthinking and being extra conservative. I get those concerns. I'm that way myself, but I think all that kind of helps to nudge people into the right realm. It's not for everybody. There still is, I think some degree of risk involved, especially if you're exploring 471(c) or other tax avenues. If you're not really wanting to stick to 280E, I think there's a special risk. But I personally feel that, hey, you're not going to have the feds trying to come after your legal business that is trying to do things properly in most states, most situations. Don't take that as any kind of hey, a guarantee that anyone is safe. But really, risk, it's always, try to quantify it, do the best you can to understand it. You can never just avoid risk. It's definitely just a reality of business and
Yeah.
most things. So you just do the best you can to understand it and make the decisions you can in those confines.
Right, right. And that is it is so interesting from the CPA perspective because it's like even a CPA, it's like we're like there's like a vanguard like legacy to being a CPA for like decades and decades of being unbiased and like the source of truth for a lot of stuff. And then obviously we were like, re-energized again after the Sox, Sarbanes-Oxley in the early 2000s. It was like, oh, that's right. These CPAs are important. They're supposed to be the unbiased. Um, but yeah, so like I was just joking with somebody the other day. It's like, even outside of cannabis, when there's like a tax change or they talk about a tax change, we have seminars, webinars, lunch and learns. We bring in like an industry, specialist to address the whole firm.
Yeah.
And so cannabis is the same thing, but it's like every quarter or so, there's like some new tax change because instead of like a federal tax change, everything's kind of state by state. And so it's very interesting. And I don't know, somebody chuckled, had a good joke where it's like, yeah, like by the letter of the law, it is kind of technically money laundering, but if you just
Yeah.
take a step back and you just like know that we're within the realm of state laws, no one's going to do anything about it. But like I can do that. I don't have a wife and kids. I have, low risk as like a business owner, but if you're, a more established sole breadwinner for your family, you have your CPA firm, you've been serving non-cannabis traditional businesses for, 5 years, a decade, 15 years, it's like, no, I'm not going to risk this at all. So it's very an interesting time to be in the industry where completely rightfully so, many people still stay out of it. And even on like the personal banking side, it's like we have had people get messed with for their personal bank, their business banks, and it's not just like the cash in the deposits. Sometimes there's full benefit plans, investments, all of these assets need to get moved. And so it is a very interesting time to be in cannabis for CPAs. But on that point, moving on, but a lot of us are in the industry. You're one of them. I'm one of them. We both know plenty more awesome CPAs and accountants who are braving, the industry, putting their license on the line, so to speak. But just given your experience in serving small, and we'll just talk about like startup cannabis companies to 50 million, like in that realm of startup to 20 million, 50 million. But I know you have like a deep experience as a financial controller. So from the financial controller perspective, what are your current challenges that you're kind of helping cannabis businesses solve right now? I know that's
For
like a
sure.
big, question, but I would say like from the accounting, finance, tax strategy, like what are you helping them solve?
For sure. And I think there's kind of a few main areas. At the end of the day, hey, I think a lot of accounting professionals find themselves wearing a lot of hats and helping with a lot of smaller matters. But I'd say probably the biggest one is profitability, right? It's especially in a lot of states that are well established. Running a profitable operation is not the standard, right? It takes really going above and beyond to meet that kind of threshold. And God knows, as we've discussed, hey, Michigan is especially challenging, right? Without license caps, you
Yep.
really see a heavy oversupply issue that other states probably see some degree of, but I don't think quite to the magnitude that Michigan is. And really, for most operators, being profitable is a target. It's a goal, right? It's not where you're at right now in 2025. And as I see it, hey, profitability isn't a problem. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of, a
Yeah.
lot of smaller varying problems, right? It could be a matter of, hey, you're not selling your goods for a high enough price, which with the price compression we see in that competition, it's, a very real matter for operators in the state. It could also be a matter of, hey, what does your operating expenses look like? Can you produce at a level that makes you competitive? God knows there's other operating costs or, skeletons in the closet, could be old contracts and interest or, there's a lot there. But ultimately,
Yeah.
helping an operation to understand first, hey, where is its baseline? Do you have a clean monthly close, good processes? Do you know where your profitability is now? Then let's dive deeper to understand, well, what, levers can we pull? What room do we have to maneuver to get this on track to, really set and achieve those goals as far as where the profitability is, right? It should be growing, right? Your business should be a vehicle for your personal life. And if, it's the other way around that you're kind of a slave to your business, I think there's good opportunity to really kind of put things under the microscope. Now, another area that I think is related, but certainly different, is cash flow. I think cash flow
Okay.
is a financial concept that a lot of operators, I just don't think have the full appreciation for what that means. A lot of people, I think, see profitability and cash flow as being synonymous, and God knows they are related, but there are very, key differences between the two. And God, AP
Yeah.
and AR, right? Accounts payable, accounts receivable, and the treatment of those in itself can make a big difference between what your profits show and where your actual cash lives. There's non-cash expenses like depreciation and amortization, plenty of different cash to accrual adjustments that are needed there. And truth is, I think, smaller businesses outside of cannabis a lot of times are cash basis, but in cannabis to
Yeah.
really maximize what you can get under Section 471, you're really kind of stuck to an accrual realm. Hey, that your financials are, follow GAAP. I think it's a part of 471 11 dash something, right? For inventories for manufacturers, that to really maximize what you can take, that your financials follow GAAP, that you have accrual accounting, which is great until it comes to understanding your cash flow and realizing that accrual accounting in a lot of ways masks the cash treatment of how things come in and out of the business. So really understanding cash flow better and not just the historical, but having a forecast for that weekly, monthly, depending on the organization and how tight cash is, really being able to anticipate what future cash needs look like, and addressing them as needed, right? Sometimes, maybe it's short-term business funding, and other times maybe it's just not a profitable operation, and funding it would only allow you to rack up bigger losses and more liabilities, right? So really kind of diving
Yeah.
deeper into those two areas, I think are pretty critical for most operators in the state these days.
And they're so intertwined. And I kind of think of it too of like, like cash flow is like the cash basis. And like, that's where everybody gets it messed up is they think it's like net income. And you're like, no, like we operate on the accrual basis. So our net income is based on our accrued in expenses and accrued in revenues, whether the cash came or not. Whereas our cash flow forecast is just how it sounds. It's purely based on the cash. And like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's a very interesting time in cannabis where I think you said it best. It's like outside of the cannabis industry, everybody's on the cash basis because it's simple, it's easy. Honestly, that's just how they run their business. It makes sense. Whereas in the cannabis industry, you can't get away with that because of the tax code and the 280E and making sure costs get allocated to inventory, then COGS. And it's just one of those things where these smaller businesses, sub 50 million, sub 100 million, are like, no, I'm wrong. Like, I think everybody should be on the accrual basis and just still do your cash flow analysis. That way you cover them both. But most businesses, it's a cost. It's like you have to be able to, you can't just like outsource your accounting to, I don't know, just like a CPA firm and like never touch it and just have it come back. It's like you kind of need your financial controller to have a little bit understanding of accrual basis accounting. How we close the books is actually very important because that's where we accrue in all the costs. So we like get the full picture. And it is kind of interesting, just kind of that ongoing conversation. And that's why education is so important in this industry. It's like I used to selfishly or just like jokingly used to blame like this cannabis industry, like, man, everybody's stoned. This is ridiculous. But it's not this people are stoned, it's that it's the startup industry. And so the startup industry, there's just everybody's building their companies for the first time. We're building all of the workflows for cash to collections. We're building all the workflows from procurement to payment, all of the workflows for inventory management. In real time. And so it's just like there's a lot of education that goes on and it's ongoing. Like it never stops because the company either grows, in which case it kind of breaks and we got to fix it again and make new systems for the growth, or it dies, in case we just got to move on. But thinking through, because you do have a deep experience as a financial controller, both outside and inside the cannabis industry. So just like high level, for other aspiring CPAs looking to get into the industry and kind of who spent their career in tax or spent their career in audit, what makes a good financial controller? Just because that's the logical next step for a lot of these CPAs. Like no one's going to come in and be an accounting manager. Like they all want to be either like FP&A manager or financial controller. So I guess like, what do you think makes a good financial controller?
That's a good question. And I wish I had a nice simple answer that, hey, it's this one trait, this one thing that is the make or break. There's a lot to it. I think being a good financial controller is somebody who is how they personally operate is very well oiled. Your internal systems, how you manage, how you keep track of stuff. A lot of times you're managing not one matter, but hey, there's 20, 30 different things going on. There's operating and purchasing and retail and compliance. We have tax matters. We get this notice in. There's just so many moving parts that that's certainly a part of, I think, the skill set there is being able to manage. And it doesn't have to exactly be robust systems. I have a Google Docs file where it's just my manual to do, and I just keep things, on my to-do list. And as I need to, I just put it to the top of the list or take it off the list. I mean, it's very manual and clunky and not at all, cutting edge. But hey, it's how I manage 20, 30 different things at a time, different clients, different things happening. Definitely something I will evolve probably sooner than later. But having systems just in general, whatever those are,
Yeah.
calendars, tasks, sticky notes, and a lot of that is really, how you operate yourself internally. Certainly, you can step into an organization, they have different processes and whatnot, but being able to really have that kind of internal discipline, I think, is certainly a big one. Um, yeah, I guess if I had to pick one, I'd probably say that there's just a lot to manage, that things can slip through the cracks. And at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's expected to know everything, but having the ability to research, to learn more, to ask questions, to have attention to detail, all are things that are pretty critical. And it might not be, it might not crop up in some big project, but hey, if, how you're reviewing accounting activity, whether it's general ledger or looking at, monthly financials, looking for anomalies, there should be good review processes. Hey, if things are done properly and consistently, you really can rely on those financials. If not, not only, is there going to be issues in compliance, but how you forecast and cost from that, can be a real issue, right? So, building a strong foundation, I think, is kind of another key aspect. And I encourage a lot of people looking for this kind of a position to ask themselves where they're at as a company. I've seen a lot of people looking for controllers that have great systems and structure and others that are on the exact opposite realm. And I think those are two very, very different hiring solutions where, hey, maybe you're looking for a controller, but in one case, you might be really prioritizing and needing to spend the money on somebody who has the experience, who can kind of come in and help solve those problems. And in the other situation, that if there's already that establishment and things make sense, and it's bringing somebody in to train them to follow the processes, to certainly use, their professional discretion when needed, but very different on that second realm as far as what you're looking for to hire.
No, that makes sense. It's kind of like hiring a builder versus a maintainer. It's like, where are you at on the business? If you're post revenue, you've been operating for a number of years, like you may just, if you haven't built it out correctly, you may need somebody to come in and build it out correctly. But if it's been built out correctly and you're just kind of growing it, you may just need to hire a few more maintainers to maintain this accounting systems that you built out. And just, yeah, with the advances in technology, like it's pretty doable.
For
No,
sure.
that makes sense. And I like the idea of like systems and workflows internally because like I just remember religiously living each month by week one, week two, week three, week four, repeat. Week one, week
Yep.
two. And like it's just this is exactly what we do. And it came from like yeah, just trying to close the books for dozens and dozens of entities around the world. It's like if your accounting team doesn't have like a very robust workflow and SOP for in week one, we close all of these accounts. Week two, we finish them and close the books officially. Week three, FP&A does all of their, you know, budget to actual analysis, KPI benchmarking analysis. Then week 4, we're just doing compliance stuff, making sure everything that needs to be filed with the right country's tax authorities or state's tax authorities gets filed, and then repeat. And it's like, it's the same thing in cannabis. It's just less zeros in the accounts, but it's the same stuff. It's like, if you don't have a system as a financial controller of like, this is what we're doing this week and this is what needs to get done, yeah, it's going to be confusing. And that's what it is like a lot of these cannabis companies have never had anybody come in and explain like how finance operates on a 4 week, 12-month cycle, 4 quarters. It's like there's 1 year, 4 quarters, 12 months, 4 weeks in each month. Like that's kind of how we see this game. So no, very interesting. Moving on to just kind of outside of kind of the current clients you've served, but just kind of your industry, higher level, looking at the American industry, the global industry, kind of just from your experience, like what are some key financial principles or best practices that like a CEO or an investor should think through in their first 30 to 90 days of essentially either starting their cannabis company or because a lot of this stuff needs to get solved before like opening day, but in the first like 30 to 90 days of like, okay, we have our license, we have the real estate, kind of we're building out our accounting or finance. Like how should CEOs and investors be thinking about building out their accounting and finance team?
And let me try to provide something that I think might be maybe a little different from the conventional, well, hey, you need to have, a QuickBooks system and chart of accounts. And, I think a lot of that is pretty straightforward and
Yeah,
self-explanatory.
yeah.
Provide
Give me
something
the
maybe a little
juice. Give me the
different.
secret sauce.
Secret sauce, man. So I think cost of goods sold is important. Gross profit is important. Gross margin is important, right? It's really based on, hey, what you can take of cost of goods sold certainly relates to your taxes, your, profit and loss. I think a, financial principle that is often overlooked is contribution margin. Now, the difference between the two, hey, in cost of goods sold, that is everything that you can take, production costs separate from non-production costs. And that's kind of how those two buckets are separated. Everything that's
Yeah.
production cost goes in the cost of goods sold. The difference between my revenue and my cost of goods sold is gross profit, and that expressed as a percentage divided by revenue is gross margin. And that, again, production, non-production, I think it's useful, right? But contribution margin takes a different approach. You're seeing variable versus fixed. And in this way, hey, we are going to capture variable costs that aren't production costs. Sales commissions, transport, those are, those kinds of costs. We're not going to include fixed costs that are production related. That's production rent, insurance, things like that. Ultimately, what this kind of an analysis tells you is, hey, am I selling my goods for more than the incremental cost it takes to produce and sell? And I think a lot of operations, especially these days with big brands, there's a lot of marketing costs that ultimately is just not really, accounted for when it comes to these kinds of decisions. Well, hey, our revenue's here, our production cost is here, we're profitable, right? But there's kind of the everything else. And I think a
Yeah.
contribution margin analysis is one that makes just a lot of sense to kind of see it differently, right? Well, let's look at all of our incremental costs, production labor, sales commissions, everything there, and ask the question, hey, is our sales price enough to cover those incremental costs? And how that kind of, an approach plays out is, hey, here's our revenue, here's our variable costs. The different is what you consider your contribution margin, right? That's a dollar amount of how much of each sale goes towards those fixed costs. And ultimately, hey, if you have more, total contribution than your fixed costs, you have a profitable operation. But that's kind of where a break even analysis comes from. And definitely not a bad practice, I think for operators in this space to kind of look at those kinds of analysis and say, hey, what does it take? What do we need to produce and sell for us to be break even or for us to make X profit? But I think kind of the whole contribution margin analysis and understanding at a unit level what our contribution is for the different products we produce helps paint, or helps kind of see things from a different angle than just gross profit. And I think ultimately, kind
Yeah.
of building your business and certainly accounting department, acknowledging the two kind ends of it, right? We want to see production, non-production, we want to see fixed variable, and ultimately make pricing and operating decisions, with both perspectives, I think goes a very long way and ultimately helping ensuring what you're doing today is sustainable.
For sure, for sure. And that's one of those very interesting things. I'm glad you brought up contribution margin because it's as these cannabis companies grow, like we have sales teams, we have marketing teams, like whole teams, and like we spend budget every month, every quarter.
Yep.
And if you don't capture those expenses and then kind of factor that into how much units did we, how much weed did we sell this last quarter? you're not going to really know the true profit of those SKUs, of that month, of that harvest, of that batch of products. And it is interesting too, especially with the kind of like there's more asset light brands today than there was 2 years ago, and for sure 5 years ago. And these asset light brands, it's like they don't own real estate. They don't own equipment. They don't even have a license to own medicated inventory. So
Yeah.
literally all they do is like pay a sales commission and a product manufacturing expense. And sometimes they don't even really pay that. And so it's very interesting where it's like they don't have a ton of direct costs, but their variable cost for sale is ultimately what makes these asset light brands profitable or not. And so yeah, I definitely have seen that where like they just don't factor in the variable cost. And it makes sense because in their mind, it's like, all right, I had to buy the vape cartridge, I had to buy the oil to go in it, I had to buy the pre-rolls or the packaging, and then I had to buy the medicated product. Then I had to pay a human to put it all together. So labor and direct material are like they see it physically, they're like, ah, perfect. That definitely makes sense. That's part of the product. And then it's like, no, like if you had to do a huge product launch party and like throw a big sponsorship party, like that should all kind of get factored into the cost of this product. But to your point, it's like you can't throw it into COGS because it's not really going to lower taxes, but it is actually impacts your true operating profit margin. So it's one of those unique things where I could see founders or investors kind of overlooking that, so to speak, in their first 90 days of thinking through this, um, just kind of this business, kind of thinking through more just teaching the industry and thinking through, because again, it's not that we have all the answers and nobody does have all the answers, but like we all learn through experience and whatnot. And so kind of thinking through that again as just any SOPs or workflows, if you could give like one piece of advice to the cannabis industry of like what is a very common SOP that's overlooked, kind of operationally, not so much when we're getting started, but we had our few sales, we paid taxes the first year, the second year, the third year. So you're kind of like a more or less an established cannabis company. So then what do they overlook?
And let me think, as far as, a specific SOP, it's a little hard to just kind of, narrow it down to
And
any
even like
one
a
SOP.
concept, it doesn't need to be like this specific SOP 4, 5, 6.
For sure. Well, I think, overall, something I've mentioned and will continue to kind of beat the drum, build a strong foundation, right? And I think for a lot of people, that is in their area of expertise. So, hey, I'm a grower, right? So I'm going to start a business. And from the grow side, it's going to be strong. You'll have your processes, your workflows. I encourage that across the whole organization. And this is speaking from somebody that's been on the accounting side that is pretty common to see that being more of an afterthought or, hey, we'll get to that. Or, I hope these days that most operators understand that, hey, this is a part of your foundation, especially if you're leaning on good, reporting and data and accounting to make decisions moving forward. It's not something that, hey, you're just going to, we'll cross that bridge or we'll wing it or, we'll just dump somebody into, an accounting spot or HR. I know it's not uncommon to, maybe, fill those roles with just somebody, right? But I think that all is a part of your foundation. And if ultimately, hey, your focus is on production and not on the back end matters, you might see an organization that, hey, can produce good products, but ultimately is not profitable, has high turnover, what have you, right? So I think building a strong foundation and really being complete in that is critical and something that I know seems easy, but certainly, being in the industry directly, I think, hey, there's, hindsight being what it is, um, definitely, building a strong foundation can really help a lot of the issues you might see crop up, not in the first maybe couple months, but even the first couple of years of just how things operate. Certainly, one thing I'll add as well, and this one will be very biased, lean on your accounting teams more. I think for a lot of operators, accounting is just seen as compliance. We just need to get it done. We need to file the taxes. That the perception of that is very bare bones. Ultimately, especially if you work with CPAs, right? You have people that, as a part of their training, have a background in internal controls, right? That might have even worked as auditors and have seen things from that perspective. Very helpful, even outside of accounting processes and controls and SOPs. And, I think beyond that, hey, you have people that are good at Excel. And a lot of what you see in cannabis companies aren't awesome systems that have everything completely. It's saying, hey, can I get this in CSV? Because I'm going to go pull it in Excel and, do extra analysis or use CSV data dumps from different software providers to fill reporting gaps. Those are all skill sets that accountants, bookkeepers have. Hey, they're the ones that do your reporting, your costing, your forecasting. I mean, they see the business and it's pretty much its totality, right? Maybe they're not there, hands-on trimming your product or touching things like that, but for them to do their jobs well, especially the person that might be the controller, FP&A, someone of that sort who handles your costing, there's just they see a lot. And there's between the exposure they have to the information, the data itself, their skill set, controls, Excel. I think those are people that a lot of times can be leaned on more, that can be more helpful. Um,
Yeah.
One other thing I do want to add, I guess, to this question, not to be too diversified in my answer, but
Yeah. Far
I'm
away.
a big Jim Collins fan. Good to Great's a book that I very much, resonate with. One
Okay.
of the early parts of that book, of that kind of flywheel concept, is getting the right people in the right seats. And as somebody who is an accountant, who is more, numbers and systems and whatnot, people are not my background, but I'll be the first to tell you that this is an industry, and most industries, right, rely on people, good people,
Yeah.
that really having
Yeah.
the
For
right
sure.
people in the right spots, having accountability, people knowing what they're expected of them, that collaboration. I mean, I think it's too critical to really try to get or to have the right people from the get, or hey, early on, if you find that somebody's not the right fit, I mean, should be something that's dealt with very, quickly and as needed. But having that right core team, I think, can be a massive make or break. And these days, there are people that are in this industry that have done this before, right? Several years ago, maybe you're building with a team where, hey, they have experience in another industry in this area and same over here. And, I think these days those are compromises you don't exactly need to make. And in a lot of
Amen.
cases, hey, maybe kind of going back to what we've mentioned earlier, maybe you're hiring a builder short term and then later hiring your maintainer for less, right? Rather than trying to make one hire that is intended to capture everything out the gate, because man, you're putting a lot of eggs in that basket.
Yeah, for sure. Then you're gonna be paying somebody like to build something, which is like it's more expensive because it's more, like brain power, but then you end up paying them forever. And it's like the hard part was completed in the first 90 to 180 days. And so it's like pay your builders to build, they're usually your fractional consultants type, hire internally for your maintainers. Because candidly, like I come into it and like you have maintainers trying to build and they're like, dude, I've never done this before, but I'm stressed. I got to talk to the CEO. And so then like when an actual finance person comes in to like create a team of like at least two people doing accounting and finance, it's like, okay, now we can build and maintain. Because it all comes down to people. It's like, and I doesn't really matter if it's a product or a service, like there is still, it's just comes down to the people kind of that are doing it. Trading fast forwarding a little bit to the kind of just the Michigan market, and then we'll get you out of here. I want to respect your time, but just thinking through the Michigan market, and I just to be, play devil's advocate, like kind of obviously in Michigan, we're selling a lot of cannabis, but like every market, there's issues of just pick one. There's profitability issues, there's price compression, there's access to capital issues, there's unregulated product working its way into the market, regulated product working its way out of the market. But just from the accounting and finance perspective, like what do you think are some unique challenges that they face in Michigan, or something that accounting and finance teams in Michigan are kind of overlooking? Not to just throw anybody under the bus and it's, or armchair quarterback it, but just like, what do you think about Michigan? You're in the market, you see it day in and day out. So, kind of what are the issues that Michigan is dealing with right now and going forward?
For sure. And I wish I had a lot of issues that nobody knows about, that I could bring something completely new to this discussion. I think, a lot of
No
issues
worries.
in
Even
Michigan,
if
the
we're
things
just
you
bringing up
mentioned.
old topics, reminds people.
Yeah. Well, hey, certainly for those outside, Michigan's an incredibly highly competitive market. And I think if you're looking per
Okay.
capita, I think Michigan tops the nation, if I'm not mistaken. And what those dollars are, hey, retail consumer, cannabis dollars per resident in Michigan, something like that, right? Now, California is still number one overall in total dollars, but I think California has three times the population that Michigan does. They do not have three times the cannabis revenue, right? So Michigan per capita, I think, is probably the hardest cannabis state to operate in. I mean, you could argue it's the hardest market in the world, right? Michigan cannabis, all things considered, is incredibly difficult. Um, and price compression is a big part of that, right? And truth is, I know a lot of people came into this industry modeling one thing where the industry now is somewhere else. But I can say
Yeah.
that I've talked to operators that I know there are people right now in this climate that are operating profitably, right? So I
Oh yeah,
certainly,
for
my
sure.
message to, I
Same.
think, people that operate in Michigan is it's tough, right? It's not impossible. And now more
Yep.
than ever is when you really, put everything internally under the microscope. Whether or not you consider us to be in a recession, I think could be a little controversial. We certainly see, inflation and, recessionary type factors currently,
Yeah, for
in
sure.
today's day and age. But all to say, I think you operate your business like this is a recession, or hey, like it's 08, 09, right? Everything's under the microscope. What are the critical things we have to pay for? A lot of the other stuff, and it's tough, right? Because people a lot of times come to cannabis, hey, free weed and get to go to all this stuff for free, or you just get a lot of benefits. And I certainly encourage cannabis companies to look at that all deeper, right? There's certainly things you need to offer to help attract and retain talent, but maybe there's things that aren't necessary, right? Put it all under the microscope. Um, and that certainly, on how you set up your accounting can have a big impact there. You track what's important, right? For larger operators, hey, maybe you, want to track repair and maintenance in more detail. We want to see our preventative versus our unscheduled. So really to take the time to align your accounting because you understand that, hey, we really don't have a lot of room for error. We need to see this in the way that aligns to how we make decisions. But so much I think of my focus in that competition is internally, and also using what you can on external data. I think if nothing else, if you're a retailer and you certainly buy products through LeafLink, that hey they LeafLink is now offered LeafLink Plus free to retailers, Integrate Metric or Dutchy POS. I think there's more resources like that are becoming available to operators. Take advantage, right? There's certain data companies, headset, BDSA, maybe something of that, makes sense. Data is important. Good internal understanding is critical. And I think I have kind of a broad guidance that certainly applies here. Um, Better understanding leads to better and easier decision making, and it's certainly a broad kind of a note, but definitely applies here. Between external, how the rest of the market's faring, pulling data from CRA, understanding internally, and not just, hey, cost of goods sold, which is required to file your accounting, right? But things like contribution margin and break even analysis, and, kind of using other established financial concepts to understand your business better. All of that helps in those decisions, right? What do we buy? What do we produce? How much do we make of each? What do we sell it for? They're problems that are never going to go away, right? That's, if anything, I think when you look at a lot of established industries, agriculture, manufacturing, there's not big margins, right? The people that survive
Yeah.
long term are working in a
It's like
realm
single
that,
digit margins across the board.
right? It's just a reality of working in an established industry is saying, hey, if there's big margins to be had, you're going to have a lot of competition flocking in. At some point, things will stabilize, and those that'll be here long term will be the ones that understand it's today, right now, and how we operate, and not just. And I've heard this, a lot from others in the space. We're a startup, right? I think it is detrimental to call yourself a startup and not to call yourself a young operating company. Hey, do you have all the boxes checked? No. But when I hear people self calling a startup, that means it's tomorrow's problems. This process, this SOP, this workflow, this data,
That's
it's
funny. I'm
tomorrow's
gonna steal
problems.
that from you.
And if you're coming into Michigan cannabis, brother, you don't have tomorrow, right? You have today to get it figured out. And I think that's
Yeah.
so much of the approach of saying, hey, you really need to come in serious, right? If you're coming into Michigan cannabis, learning how to operate at scale, you're not going to be here. You should be coming in knowing how to operate at scale, or at least to have the right team around you. But yeah, it's just not a market where you can cut your teeth in, whereas maybe 5 years ago it was a different matter. Um,
And
Definitely, yeah, just got
I
to
would
have
say
it.
it's like that for most markets. It's becoming less and less that you can cut your teeth in a new market. It's like because even the locals who get licenses for the first time, they're partnering with sources of capital that were successful in other markets. They're partnering with, people that are going to be very strategic advisors that have already done this in other markets successfully. And so they made the tough decisions based on mistakes. And so, yeah, it's those days are becoming less and less. And so, but it's still it is still a young industry, but I like the idea of like you can't really just like because I've seen that too of like, well, we're a startup, so we didn't think about this, or we're a startup, so we didn't focus on this, and it's like, for better or for worse, business is competitive, and we keep score with profit. It just is what it is. Like you can only run out of money so long for so many times before you run out of business. And then you're out of the game. And so it's like, no, like we can kind of keep score. And like, if you want to stay in the game, you really got to come correct. And it's not with new financial concepts, it's coming
No.
correct with old established financial concepts that we took from agriculture of berries at scale, that we took from manufacturing consumer packaged goods at scale. It's financial concepts from running multiple retail stores at scale, and then just boiling it back down to single principle with these companies, and then we can scale it back up from there. Um,
Yeah.
and I agree, it's like an interesting time in cannabis because like there was such a run from like 2015 to 2020, 2022, where there's capital everywhere, new markets expanding. But those days are done, and we're like actually like swung the other direction where there's like a 90% reduction in capital. Price compression is much more intense than it used to be. So put it under a microscope because like the plans that we had that we built 3 years ago, they're not sustainable, and so no longer are we like just heads down, we're going to follow the plan. We said we're going to expand revenues, we're going to expand to new markets, we're going to acquire license in real estate here and do a joint venture here. Like, no, people are not, that's not sustainable. So now it's, don't try to do any expansion plans. Let's just like our current footprint, our current operation, let's maximize that, aka maximize the profit of the assets that we already have. Um, as well as controlling cost. It's like when it was $4,000 a pound, the head grower was the coolest person at the company, but now it's like a grand a pound, if that. And so the accountant and the CFO are now the coolest person at the company because like we understand the costs, and it's like it's no longer about growing the fire and selling it for absorbent price. It's like, what can we grow? How much can it cost us to grow the fire? And so then we got to
Yeah.
go talk to like the accounting team to be like, all right, like what can we actually cut? And the conversation is just different, but I think at the end of the day, it's just a business conversation. Whether you're talking about expanding revenues or controlling costs, at the end of the day, it's a conversation about profit. And so that's kind of why I do really like the your idea of just let's put everything under a microscope, whether it's Michigan, any of the other states. It's like we're in this little time period where the kind of market's down, and so people can take more of a break to pause as opposed to just focusing on the next expansion and where's the capital going to come from that expansion. And we can kind of circle the wagons. But
Yeah.
awesome. I could nerd out with you all day on cannabis, Nick. Clearly, you're a pretty smart guy. CPA turned cannabis industry financial controller extraordinaire. But let people know where they can find you, Nick, and what are you up to the rest of 2025 as we bring this into land?
For sure. Well, hey, you can find me website eaton-advisory.com, EATON-ADVISORY.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I think most that's just under Nicholas Eaton. Um, yeah, I continuing to build and grow Eaton Advisory. Really just a practice where, hey, I have these kinds of discussions with business owners and leaders and just understand, their business in more detail and the specific challenges they're facing and to see, hey, is there a way that I can help? And, if I can, great. Either way, I find that that is, a very worthwhile discussion to discuss your business
Yeah.
in that particular context. But I think for a lot of, owners and operators just isn't really where their focus is. Um, so I'll be continuing to to build this operation. Um, yeah, it's hey, also trying to get a little bit of sun, enjoy the Michigan weather as best as possible. But Eaton Advisory is still growing, and definitely would love to just talk with anybody that has any kind of accounting concerns, business questions. Worst case scenario, it's not something I can help in. Hey, I'm not a grower, I'm not a marketer, but definitely have a good circle of people that I can refer that can maybe help those issues. But love talking about the industry. Hey, whatever your position is in the industry, would love to chat and see if there's a way I can help. Ultimately, I do look as far as who I work with in clients to work with cannabis business owners, operators, leaders. Those businesses that are probably in the 1 to 20 million gross range. That's just kind of the realm that I can have the biggest impact. Less than that, I usually can't help as in a way that's is worthwhile for what working together entails. Bigger than that, a lot of times, you need somebody full time that really plays more of an in-house CFO or somebody to really kind of provide that internal analysis. Though, hey, again, always open to just meeting different operators, connecting with people in cannabis, love learning, just meeting new people and learning what their passions are. And, hey, is there a way we can work together?
Awesome, awesome. Well, you heard it there, people. Whether you're in Michigan or not, feel free to reach out to Nick for a quick advisory session. I agree. It's like nobody knows everything, and even if you already have a solution, like I'm always talking to other solutions to make sure my solution is the best. And if I
Right.
learn anything, then I bring it back to my solution and ask them why they're not doing it. So reach out to Nick. Let's spread the knowledge, and you have a good day, Nick. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. You as well, Raymond. I appreciate everything. Thank you.